Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with the much-anticipated redacted copy of the search warrant affidavit of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. And here it is, the 38-page affidavit. And as you can see, nearly half of it has been redacted. Those redactions by the DOJ and approved by U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart are designed to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation by not disclosing highly sensitive information about witnesses and other grand jury material. But what is now public tells a damning story about the former twice-impeached president, who, by the way, is the one who originally called for the affidavit to be released, trying to play chicken with the DOJ before they called his bluff. Now, first, in the government's 13-page memo explaining the rationale for the redactions, they say that parts must remain sealed to, quote, protect the safety and privacy of a significant number of civilian witnesses in addition to law enforcement. In other words, the FBI's probable cause was not based on a single informant, but on a number of different witnesses, likely having to be people inside Trump's orbit. And I'm sure that fact is not sitting well with Donald tonight. And the affidavit explains why many of them might have cooperated. It describes in specific detail the nature of some of the documents that were just laying around Trump's golf resort. In the 15 boxes of documents returned to the National Archives in January, the FBI found 184 unique documents bearing classification markings, including 67 documents marked as confidential, 92 marked as secret, and 25 marked top secret. In many cases, just mixed in with magazines and like newspaper clippings and other detritus in the same box. But even more alarming is the following line that indicates some of the other markings. HCS refers to Human Control System, which generally refers to a program from a CIA officer about conversations with a confidential source overseas, namely a spy. These reports don't normally leave the CIA. SI refers to Special Intelligence, which is communication intercepts by agencies like the NSA of foreign leaders or other individuals overseas. And then there is no foreign, which is intelligence so sensitive it can't even be shared with any foreign nationals, even our closest allies. The affidavit adds that several of the documents also contain what appears to be Trump's handwritten notes Trump is believed to have written after he left the presidency. Now, we already knew that Trump has a terrible track record when it comes to keeping intelligence to himself. He divulged highly classified material given to us by Israel with the Russians. And of all places, the Oval Office. So beyond the fact that he has shared this information before, why in the world would he need to have these kinds of sensitive documents in Florida, or really anywhere? Remember, these are some of our government's most highly protected materials, and they were just laying around there in boxes at Mar-a-Lago, where who knows what and who knows who could have access for a year and a half. Joining me now is John Brennan, former director of the CIA and an MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst. Katie Phang, MSNBC legal analyst and host of The Katie Phang Show. And Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor and currently legal affairs columnist for Politico. Director Brennan, I have to start with you. I'm going to put these classifications back up again. HUMINT, HCS, which is human intelligence, ORCON, which is originator control, no foreign, which means you cannot share this with foreign nationals, FISA, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and signals intelligence, meaning when we spy on foreign governments, et cetera. Can you, as a former CIA director, think of any innocent explanation for why any president would have in his possession, outside of a SCIF, outside of a safe place to read it in Washington, D.C., information on who our spies are, information like the information that Donald Trump had?
No. In a word, no. There is no plausible explanation for any type of retention of these documents, this information that contains some of the most sensitive national security information that our government has. These are the markings that are on documents, whether they be the raw intelligence reports that the CIA generates or even the finished analytic products that are shared with policymakers. But they are required to be held in certain compartmented facilities to ensure that they're not going to be exposed and there will be no unauthorized disclosure that could put our sources and methods and people's lives at risk, as well as our national security. And so therefore, a president, when they're in the Oval Office, they will see some of those documents. There are times that some presidents may take those documents back to the residence to work on them or to review them, but they are always kept under lock and key, under very close, tight supervision. But there is no reason why any president would remove them after they've finished office to their personal residence. They're supposed to go to the National Archives, where presidents can actually review them and access them if they're going to write their memos and memoirs. But again, Donald Trump had no basis, no reason, no legal basis to retain those documents at Mar-a-Lago.
Just one more. I'm going to drill in one more time. Lots of presidents have written memoirs. They all write memoirs. Have you ever heard of a president putting information, specific information, names, locations of our human intelligence assets, our spies, in a book? In a memoir?
No,
I know it's a crazy, silly question.
Yeah, and the HCS marking does not mean that the documents contained any names of sources.
Okay.
But they do contain sensitive information that come from those very sensitive sources. And there will be a source description that is included in those documents. So there is no reason for a president to keep those documents outside of the work environment of the White House or the West Wing. And therefore, whenever any president leaves office, they should not take any of that with them. And their staff has an obligation, a legal and professional and ethical obligation, to make sure that that information does not leave the White House and go back to a personal residence.
Renato Mariotti, thank you, for Director, for making that very clear. Renato Mariotti, I want to read from Title 18, Code 18, U.S. Code 2071. And it talks about the concealment, removal, or mutilation generally. Whoever having the custody of any such record, proceeding, map, book, document, paper, or other thing willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, falsifies, or destroys the same shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. And here's an important part: and shall forfeit his office and be disqualified from holding any office under the United States. Donald Trump apparently wrote notes, personal notes, on these documents, meaning he altered them without any authorization to do so. He clearly took them, concealed them, and held on to them for 18 months. Do you see evidence of a crime here?
I do. I mean, I think concealment, Joy, is the most straightforward way of approaching this. The Justice Department really, I think, bent over backwards to be very fair and treat Trump with kid gloves. They asked for these documents politely. If it was me or you or one of my clients, they would not be asking politely. They would be coming to get those documents. So they asked very politely. They issued a subpoena. And after all of that, they received an assurance from Trump's attorney that they had everything. And of course, that turned out not to be true. That's why a search warrant was executed. That's why they ultimately recovered documents in that search warrant. So I think this is ultimately going to be a straight up concealment case. And I think it's, frankly, much easier to prove than a lot of the other potential criminal charges that have been discussed in the past. It's just much more straightforward.
This is from what the Department of Justice had to say. Premature disclosure of the contents of this affidavit and related documents may have a significant and negative impact on the continuing investigation, may severely jeopardize its effectiveness by allowing criminal parties an opportunity to flee, destroy evidence stored electronically or otherwise, change patterns of behavior, and notify criminal confederates. If the DOJ is that concerned that Donald Trump could copy, could mail out, could conceal, could destroy any of these documents, how on earth, Renato, did they wait 18 months and let him have and hold on to these documents for a year and a half?
Well, I think that there's actually an argument to be made here that they took things too easy on Trump. I mean, I will just say, I actually plan on, look, I'm a defense attorney now, and I plan on making it clear to the Justice Department in some of my cases that, hey, I want to send you a letter that you should include with the search warrant that you try to obtain. Let the judge know my point of view. I mean, they went out of their way to make things easy for Donald Trump to bend over backwards, give him every opportunity to not have the ability to charge him. And so I think that's actually what you just quoted there, by the way, is really telling, Joy, because they talk about an ongoing investigation. And that's really remarkable. I mean, we're sitting here. One of the baselines here that it's not even in many ways the headline, but it's underneath it all, is There's an ongoing investigation of the former president of the United States. He's the subject of that investigation. And I don't think there's any possibility to deny that. It's unbelievable.